Rosa looked out the window at the dry, cracked earth that used to be their cornfield. The morning sun was already burning hot, and it wasn't even 8 o'clock yet. She touched her flat belly through her faded dress and sighed. 7 years of marriage, and still no children to show for it. In the kitchen, her mother-in-law Carmen was already making her daily complaints. "Look at Maria next door," the old woman said, pointing through the window. "3 children and another one coming." "That's what a real woman looks like," Rosa said nothing. She had heard this speech every day for the past 3 years. Ever since Carmen moved in with them after her husband died, life had become a constant. Reminder of Rosa's failures as a wife, her husband Diego was out in the fields again, trying to save what little was left of their crops. The drought had been going on for 8 months now. The government kept promising rain, but the sky stayed clear and merciless. Their neighbors were starting to leave the village, packing up their few belongings and heading to the cities to find work. Rosa walked to the well in their backyard. She dropped the bucket down and heard it hit the bottom with a hollow thud. Almost dry, just like everything else in her life. She pulled up what little water was left and carried it back to the house. "Even the well is giving up on us," she whispered to herself. Diego came in for lunch, his clothes covered in dust and his face dark with worry. He sat at their small wooden table without saying a word. Rosa served him beans and tortillas, the same meal they had been eating for weeks because it was all they could afford. "How bad is it out there?" Rosa asked quietly. Diego looked up at her with tired eyes. "We lost another section yesterday. The corn is completely dead now. Maybe we can save some of the beans, but..." He shrugged and went back to eating. Carmen chose that moment to speak up again. "You know what our problem is?" she said, looking directly at Rosa. "God doesn't bless barren women. He punishes them by taking away everything around them, too." Rosa felt her cheeks burn with shame. She had heard this before, but it never stopped hurting. Diego didn't defend her. He never did anymore. That afternoon, Rosa walked to the church at the center of their small village. Father Martinez was sweeping the steps when she arrived. "Good afternoon, Rosa," he said kindly. "How are you holding up?" "I need to pray," she said simply. Inside the cool, dark church, Rosa knelt before the statue of the Virgin Mary. She had prayed here so many times before, begging for a child. Now she found herself praying for something different. "Please," she whispered, "just help us survive this. Help Diego find a way to save our farm. Help me find a way to be useful to my family." When she got home, she found Diego and Carmen talking in hushed voices in the kitchen. They stopped when they saw her. "What's wrong?" Rosa asked. Diego looked uncomfortable. "Nothing, just, discussing our options." But Rosa could see in Carmen's eyes that something was being planned. Something that involved her. That night, Rosa lay awake listening to Diego toss and turn beside her. She could feel the weight of his worry, the pressure of trying to keep their family fed and their land from being taken by the bank. She wanted to comfort him, but she didn't know how. What comfort could a barren wife offer? The next morning brought news that made everything worse. Their neighbor Pedro had sold his farm to the bank for almost nothing. His family was moving to Mexico City, where his brother worked in a factory. "At least they have children to think about," Carmen said, watching Pedro's family load their belongings into an old truck. "Children give you a reason to keep fighting." Rosa felt the words like a knife in her heart. She excused herself and went to tend their small vegetable garden behind the house. Most of the plants were dying, but she kept watering them anyway. It was the only thing that made her feel useful. She was pulling weeds when she heard voices from the house. Diego was talking to someone she didn't recognize. The voice was deep and spoke Spanish with a strange accent. Rosa crept closer to listen. "I need someone to help with cooking and cleaning," the stranger was saying. "My house is big, and I work long days." "I can pay well." "How well?" Diego asked. "Enough to keep a family fed for many months." Rosa's heart started beating faster. She peeked around the corner and saw a tall man in a cowboy hat talking to Diego. He looked American, with light skin and blue eyes. His truck was newer than any vehicle she had ever seen in their village. The work is not easy, the man continued. It's far from here, across the border. But it's honest work, and there's always food and a place to sleep. Diego was nodding, and Rosa could see the wheels turning in his mind. Carmen appeared in the doorway, her eyes sharp with interest. What kind of ... arrangement are you talking about? Carmen asked. The American man reached into his truck and pulled out a large sack. He opened it to show them the contents. Corn. Fresh, golden corn, more than Rosa had seen in months. I give you this now, he said. You give me someone to work for me. Fair trade? Rosa felt sick to her stomach. She understood what was happening, but she couldn't quite believe it. Her own husband was negotiating to trade her away like property that evening. After the American man had left, Rosa confronted Diego. You're selling me, she said. It wasn't a question. Diego couldn't look at her. It's not selling, it's work. You'll have a job, a place to live, food to eat. And we'll have enough corn to survive until the rains come. And if the rains never come? Diego finally met her eyes. Then at least one of us will be safe. Rosa looked around their small house, at the wedding picture on the wall, at the wooden cross her grandmother had given her. This was her home, her life, her world, and tomorrow it would all be gone. Do I have a choice? She asked. The silence that followed was her answer. Rosa spent her last night in the village packing her few belongings into a small bag. A change of clothes, her grandmother's rosary, and a picture of her parents. Everything else would stay behind. As she lay in bed for the last time, listening to Diego's breathing beside her, Rosa thought about the life she had imagined when she was young. She had dreamed of children playing in their yard, of growing old with Diego, of being buried someday in the village cemetery next to her parents. Now she was going to disappear into a foreign country with a stranger, and she didn't even know if she would ever see her home again. The morning came too soon. The American man arrived early, just as the sun was rising. Rosa said goodbye to Carmen, who didn't even pretend to be sad. She hugged Diego, who whispered, "I'm sorry," in her ear, but Rosa could feel his relief. As the truck pulled away from the only home she had ever known, Rosa watched her village grow smaller in the side mirror. She touched her flat belly one last time and wondered if this was God's plan all along. Maybe Carmen was right. Maybe barren women were meant to suffer. The truck turned onto the main road and her old life disappeared completely. The truck bounced along the dusty road and Rosa gripped the door handle to keep from sliding across the worn seat. The American man, who had told her to call him Tom, drove in complete silence. She stole glances at him from the corner of her eye, trying to figure out what kind of person he was. His hands on the steering wheel were rough and calloused, like Diego's had been before the drought killed their crops. But unlike Diego, this man seemed calm, almost peaceful. He didn't look angry or cruel. Rosa wasn't sure if that made her feel better or worse. They stopped at a gas station after an hour of driving. Tom got out to fill the tank and buy supplies. Through the window, Rosa watched him talk to the attendant in Ish. She caught a few words she recognized, but not enough to understand what they were saying. When Tom came back to the truck, he handed her a bottle of cold water and a sandwich, wrapped in plastic. Rosa was so surprised by this kindness that she almost started crying. In the past few months, Diego had barely looked at her, let alone thought about whether she was hungry or thirsty. "Gracias," she whispered. Tom nodded and started the truck. "Again, long drive," he said in his broken Spanish. "Need to eat." As they drove further from her village, Rosa watched the landscape change. The drought had affected this area too, but not as badly. She saw cattle grazing in fields that still had some green grass. She saw farmhouses with gardens that actually had vegetables growing. Her village had been dying slowly for months. But out here, life was still possible. They reached the border crossing just before noon. Rosa had never seen so many cars and trucks lined up in one place. Tom handed her a piece of paper and told her to keep it with her always. She couldn't read English, but she understood it was important. The border guard looked at Rosa with suspicious eyes. He said something to Tom in rapid English, and Tom responded calmly. The guard looked at the papers again, then at Rosa, then back at Tom. Finally, He waved them through. Rosa realized she was holding her breath and forced herself to breathe normally. She was now in America, further from home than she had ever been in her life. The American side looked different immediately. The roads were smoother, the buildings newer. Even the cars looked cleaner and more expensive. Rosa pressed her face to the window, taking in everything she could see. They stopped for lunch at a small restaurant near the highway. Tom ordered for both of them, and the waitress brought them plates of food that smelled amazing. Rosa couldn't remember the last time she had eaten meat, but there was chicken and beef and more vegetables than she had seen in months. "Eat," Tom said, pointing to her plate. "Still a long way to go." Rosa ate carefully, trying not to seem too hungry. But the food was so good, and she had been living on beans and corn for so long that she couldn't help herself. She cleaned her plate completely. Tom watched her eat with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not cruel, not kind, just observant. Like he was trying to figure her out the same way she was trying to figure him out. Back in the truck, Rosa found herself thinking about Diego. Was he already eating the corn Tom had given him? Was he relieved that she was gone, that he no longer had to see the disappointment in his mother's eyes every time she looked at Rosa's childless body? The thought made her angry, which surprised her. She had been sad and scared, but anger was new. How could Diego have done this to her? How could he have traded away 7 years of marriage for a sack of corn? The sun was getting lower in the sky when they finally turned off the main highway onto a dirt road. Rosa had dozed off, and the change in the road surface woke her up. All around them now was open land, rolling hills covered with brown grass and scattered trees. "Almost there," Tom said. In the distance, Rosa could see buildings. As they got closer, she realized it was a ranch. It was a big house, several smaller buildings, and fenced areas where cattle were grazing. It was bigger than her entire village. Tom parked the truck near the main house and got out. Rosa sat for a moment, unsure of what to do. Everything had happened so fast. This morning she had woken up in her own bed, in her own village, and now she was in a foreign country about to start a completely different life. Tom opened her door and gestured for her to follow him. He carried her small bag, which looked even smaller in his large hands. The house was 2 stories tall, painted white with a green roof. There were flowers planted along the front, though many of them looked dry from the heat. Inside, the house was cool and quiet. Rosa had never been in a house with air conditioning before. The floors were made of smooth wood, and the furniture looked expensive but comfortable. Everything was clean but had a lived-in feeling, like someone had once cared very much about making it a home. Tom led her to a room on the first floor, near the kitchen. It had a single bed with clean white sheets, a dresser, and a window that looked out toward the cattle fields. There was even a small bathroom attached, with running water and a shower. "Your room," Tom said, setting her bag on the bed. Rosa looked around in amazement. This room was bigger than the bedroom she had shared with Diego, and it was all hers. Tom showed her the rest of the house. The kitchen was huge, with a stove that had 6 burners and a refrigerator bigger than any she had ever seen. There was a living room with a television and comfortable chairs. Upstairs were more bedrooms, all empty and waiting. "Big house for one person," Rosa said, then immediately regretted speaking. Tom stopped and looked at her. For a moment, his calm expression cracked, and Rosa saw something that looked like pain flash across his face. "Used to be more people," he said quietly. "Now just me." He showed her where the cleaning supplies were kept, where the food was stored, how to use the washing machine. Everything was so modern, so different from what she was used to. Rosa tried to pay attention, but her head was spinning from all the new information. "Questions?" Tom asked when they were back in the kitchen. Rosa had 1,000 questions, but she didn't know how to ask them in Spanish, let alone in the few English words she knew. So she just shook her head. Tom nodded and headed toward the door. "I work early," he said. "Sleep now. Start tomorrow." After he left, Rosa sat on her new bed and looked around her new room. She could hear cattle lowing in the distance and the sound of wind through the trees outside her window. It was so quiet compared to her village where there were always children playing and neighbors talking and dogs barking. She took out her grandmother's rosary and held it in her hands. "Abuela," she whispered, "I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. I don't know if this is punishment or salvation." She thought about Diego, probably finishing his dinner of fresh corn right now. She thought about Carmen, finally happy that the Barren wife was gone. She thought about her parents buried in the village cemetery, and wondered if she would ever see their graves again. Rosa had always believed that God had a plan for everyone. But sitting in this strange room in this foreign country, she couldn't understand what plan could possibly include selling a wife. Like a piece of livestock, she changed into her nightgown and lay down on the soft bed. The sheets smelled like laundry soap and sunshine. Through her window, she could see stars appearing in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new rules to learn, new ways to survive. But tonight, for the first time in months, Rosa's belly was full and her bed was comfortable. Maybe that was enough for now. Rosa woke up before dawn, confused about where she was. The bed was too soft, the room too quiet. Then she remembered. She was in Texas now, in Tom's house, and her old life was gone forever. She got dressed quickly and went to the kitchen. Tom was already there, drinking coffee and reading a newspaper. He looked up when she entered and nodded toward the stove. "Coffee?" he asked. Rosa nodded, though she had no idea how to use the fancy coffee machine. Tom showed her silently, pointing to different buttons and gesturing how much water to add. His hands were gentle as he guided her through the process, never making her feel stupid for not knowing. When the coffee was ready, Tom poured 2 cups and handed her one. They sat at the kitchen table in silence, him reading his newspaper and her looking out the window at the ranch awakening in the morning light. After a few minutes, Tom stood up and put on his hat. "Food in refrigerator," he said, pointing. "Clean. House, make dinner for 6 o'clock, he paused at the door. "No, go far from house. Dangerous." Then he was gone, leaving Rosa alone in the big, quiet house. She spent the morning exploring more carefully than she had the night before. The house was beautiful but felt empty, like a museum of someone else's life. There were pictures on the walls, but they were all landscapes or cattle. No family photos, no personal touches that might tell her who Tom really was. In the living room, she found a thick layer of dust on the furniture. It was clear that no one had spent much time here recently. Rosa wondered how long Tom had been living alone in this big house, eating simple meals and sleeping in one room while the rest of it gathered dust. She started cleaning, grateful to have something familiar to do. Cleaning she understood, even if the tools were different. The vacuum cleaner was much more powerful than the old broom she was used to, and the cleaning supplies smelled like flowers instead of harsh chemicals. As she worked, Rosa found herself thinking about her first few days. Tom had been true to his word about food. The refrigerator was always full, and he had shown her where he kept money for groceries if she needed anything. But he barely spoke to her, communicating mostly through gestures and the few Spanish words he knew. At first, Rosa had been grateful for the silence. It meant she didn't have to struggle with English or worry about saying the wrong thing. But as the days passed, the quiet began to feel heavy. She missed having someone to talk to, even if it was just Carmen complaining about something. The work wasn't difficult. The house was large, but Tom lived simply. He slept in one bedroom, used only the kitchen and one bathroom, and spent most of his time outside with the cattle. Rosa found herself inventing extra tasks just to fill the long, quiet hours. She cooked dinner every evening at 6 o'clock exactly, as Tom had requested. He always thanked her politely and ate everything she made, but he rarely made conversation. Sometimes he would comment on the weather or mention work he needed to do the next day, but that was all. Rosa began to feel like a ghost haunting someone else's life. She cleaned rooms that no one used, cooked meals that were eaten in silence, and slept in a comfortable bed while feeling more alone than she ever had in her life. The loneliness was worse than anything she had experienced during her marriage to Diego. At least then she had been part of a community, even if she was seen as a failure. Here, she was just invisible. 2 weeks into her new life, Rosa made a discovery that changed everything. She was cleaning the upstairs bedrooms when she found one that was different from the others. This room clearly hadn't been touched in years. There was a layer of dust on everything, but underneath, Rosa could see that it had once been carefully prepared. There was a rocking chair by the window, painted pale yellow, a chest of drawers with tiny handles, a crib in the corner, covered with a white sheet. This had been a nursery, prepared for a baby that never came. Rosa sat in the rocking chair and looked around the room. Now Tom's silence made more sense. He understood what it felt like to prepare for a child that never arrived. He knew the pain of empty rooms and unfulfilled dreams. That evening, Rosa watched Tom more carefully during dinner. She noticed the way his eyes sometimes got distant, the way he touched his wedding ring without seeming to realize he was doing it. This was a man carrying his own burden of loss. After dinner, Rosa worked up the courage to speak. "Tom," she said. Hesitantly, the room upstairs. Tom's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. He looked at her with something that might have been panic in his eyes. "I clean it," Rosa continued gently. "Is okay?" Tom was quiet for a long moment, then he nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "Is okay." That night, Rosa heard Tom walking around upstairs for hours. She wondered if he was in the nursery, finally confronting whatever memories he had been avoiding. The next morning, Tom was quieter than usual, but there was something different about him. He looked tired but also relieved, like someone who had finally let go of a breath he'd been holding for too long. Over the following weeks, Rosa began to understand more about the man who had bought her from her husband. She learned that he woke up every morning at 5 o'clock and spent his days working with the cattle. She learned that he liked his coffee black and his meals simple. She learned that he read the newspaper every morning and watched the weather report every evening, but she also learned that he was kind in small ways. He always made sure the house was warm enough for her. He bought groceries without her asking, somehow knowing what she needed. When she got sick with a fever, he brought her medicine and soup, checking on her every few hours without making her feel like a burden. Rosa began to see that Tom hadn't bought her to be his slave. He had bought her to save her from Diego, though. She wasn't sure he fully understood that himself. One evening, as Rosa was washing dishes, she realized something that surprised her. She hadn't thought about Diego in 3 days. For months before leaving her village, every minute of every day had been filled with anxiety about the drought, about money, about her failure as a wife. Here, those worries felt far away. She wasn't happy exactly, but she wasn't miserable either. She was safe, fed, and warm. For someone who had spent the last year of her marriage feeling like a burden, that was something, but she was still terribly lonely. She missed speaking Spanish, missed having conversations, missed feeling like she was part of something bigger than just keeping house for a silent man. Sometimes, Rosa stood at her bedroom window and looked out at the endless expanse of ranch land. She was free to walk anywhere she could see, but where would she go? She didn't speak English well enough to ask for help, didn't have money for a bus ticket, and didn't even know which direction her village was from here. She was free, but she was also trapped, safe but isolated. Fed, but starving for human connection, Rosa began to understand that there were different kinds of prisons. Some had bars and locks, and some just had silence and distance. She had escaped the prison of her marriage to Diego, but now she was in a different kind of cage. At least this cage was comfortable, and the man who kept the key seemed to understand something about loneliness himself. Every night, Rosa held her grandmother's rosary and prayed for guidance. She prayed for Diego and even for Carmen, hoping they were surviving the drought. She prayed for Tom, who clearly had his own pain to bear. And she prayed for herself, asking for the strength to find purpose in this strange new life. Sometimes, late at night, she thought she could hear Tom moving around upstairs, and she wondered if he was praying too. 3 months had passed since Rosa arrived at the ranch, and she was beginning to notice small changes in her daily routine. It started with the flowers. Every few days, Rosa would find wildflowers on her windowsill when she woke up. Nothing fancy, just simple flowers that Tom must have picked while doing his morning work with the cattle. Bluebonnets, Indian paintbrush, black-eyed Susans. They never came with a note or explanation, and Tom never mentioned them. At first, Rosa thought maybe the wind had blown them there. But they were always arranged carefully, never scattered like they would be if they had fallen naturally. Someone was placing them there on purpose. One morning, Rosa caught a glimpse of Tom through her window just as the sun was coming up. He was walking toward the house with something in his hand, moving quietly like he didn't want to be seen. When she checked her windowsill an hour later, there were fresh yellow wildflowers sitting in a small glass jar. Rosa felt something warm flutter in her chest. It was the first truly kind gesture anyone had made toward her in longer than she could remember. Diego used to bring her flowers when they were first married, but that had stopped years ago. She began to pay more attention to other small kindnesses she had been taking for granted. Tom always made sure there was fresh coffee ready when she got up in the morning. He had bought extra blankets for her room without her asking. When she had mentioned that she missed certain foods from home, those items had appeared in the kitchen. The next day, Rosa realized that Tom had been taking care of her in quiet ways, and she had been so focused on her loneliness that she hadn't noticed. One evening, as Rosa was preparing dinner, a thunderstorm hit the ranch. The wind howled around. The house and rain pounded against the windows. Rosa had always been afraid of storms, and this one was particularly fierce. When a loud crack of thunder shook the house, Rosa dropped the plate she was holding. It shattered on the kitchen floor, and she immediately dropped to her knees to clean it up, her hands shaking. Tom appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of breaking glass. He saw Rosa on the floor, tears streaming down her face, and quickly knelt beside her. "No, no," he said gently, taking the broken pieces from her hands. "Dangerous, I clean." But Rosa couldn't stop crying. The storm, the broken plate, the months of isolation, it all came pouring out at once. She sat on the kitchen floor and sobbed like a child. Tom looked uncertain for a moment, then slowly sat down beside her. He didn't try to touch her or make her stop crying. He just sat there, a solid presence in the storm, until her tears finally stopped. "Sorry," Rosa whispered when she could speak again. "No sorry," Tom said. "Storm's scary. I scared too, sometimes." Rosa looked at him in surprise. She couldn't imagine this strong, silent man being afraid of anything. Tom stood up and finished cleaning the broken plate, then helped Rosa to her feet. "Dinner later," he said. "Now we wait for storm to pass." They sat in the living room, listening to the rain and thunder. Tom turned on the television to a weather channel, and they watched the radar showing the storm moving across the area. Rosa was surprised to discover that Tom spoke to the television in English, muttering comments about the weather patterns. "You speak English good," Rosa said hesitantly. Tom looked at her. "Born here," he said. "You speak Spanish good." Rosa almost smiled. "Born there." It was a simple exchange, but it was the longest conversation they had ever had. When the storm finally passed, Rosa realized that something had shifted between them. The wall of silence that had surrounded their daily interactions had developed a small crack over the next few weeks. Rosa began to notice more about Tom's habits and personality. She learned that he talked to the cattle while he worked, speaking to them in both English and broken Spanish. She learned that he read books in the evenings, thick novels with worn covers that he kept on a shelf in the living room. One day, while dusting the living room, Rosa pulled out one of his books. It was in English, so she couldn't read it, but she could see Tom's name written inside the front cover in careful handwriting. Thomas Wade. It was the first time she had seen his full name written down. That evening, Rosa worked up the courage to ask him about the books. "You like to read?" she said during dinner. Tom nodded. "Help pass time?" he said. "You like read?" "In Spanish, yes." "English too hard." Tom was quiet for a moment, then got up and left the room. Rosa thought she had somehow offended him, but he came back a few minutes later with a thin book in his hand. "Easy English," he said, handing it to her. "Stories for, how you say, children learning." Rosa opened the book and saw simple sentences with pictures. It was a book for people learning to read English as a second language. The stories were basic, but she could understand most of the words. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. From that night on, Rosa read a little bit each evening. Tom would sit in his chair with his own book, and she would sit on the couch with hers. Sometimes she would ask him what a word meant, and he would try to explain it in Spanish or act it out until she understood. These quiet evenings became Rosa's favorite part of the day. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, she felt like she was sharing something with another person instead of just existing in the same space. One evening, as Rosa was struggling with a particularly difficult passage, Tom set down his book and moved to sit beside her on the couch. "What word?" he asked. Rosa pointed to the word lonely on the page. Tom was quiet for a long moment. "Lonely," he said finally, "is when you want people but no people there." Rosa looked at him. "Like now?" Tom met her eyes, and for the first time since she had arrived, she saw real emotion there. "Yes," he said quietly. "Like now." It was in that moment that Rosa understood something important. Tom hadn't brought her to the ranch just to have someone to cook and clean. He had brought her here because he was as isolated and lonely as she was. He needed human connection just as much as she did, but he didn't know how to ask for it. "Tom," Rosa said carefully, "how long you alone here?" Tom's jaw tightened, and Rosa thought he might not answer. But after a moment, he spoke. "My wife? She died 5 years ago. Car accident. She was—" He touched his stomach. "Baby comin'." Rosa felt her heart break for him. "I'm sorry," she said. Tom nodded. "She want this house full of children. Big family. Now just ... empty." Rosa understood now why the nursery upstairs had been left untouched, why Tom lived like a ghost in his own house. He had been frozen in grief for 5 years, unable to move forward but unable to let go. "Very hard," Rosa said softly. "Lose family. Very hard." "You understand?" Tom said, looking at her with surprise. Rosa thought about Diego, about the children she had never been able to give him, about the family she had lost when he sold her. "Yes," she said, "I understand." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts but no longer feeling quite so alone. Outside, the cattle were settling down for the night, and the house felt different somehow. Less empty, more alive. When Rosa went to bed that night, she found a small bouquet of wildflowers on her windowsill, but this time there was something else. A piece of paper with "Thank you" written in Tom's careful handwriting. Rosa smiled as she got ready for bed. Tomorrow would bring another quiet day on the ranch, but now the silence felt different. It wasn't the silence of two strangers anymore. It was the silence of two people who were beginning to understand each other. For the first time since leaving her village, Rosa fell asleep without crying. The morning after Tom told Rosa about his wife, everything felt different. Rosa woke up to find not just flowers on her windowsill, but a small notebook and a pen beside them. When she went to the kitchen for coffee, Tom was there waiting with a piece of paper in his hand. "I think," he said slowly, "maybe we help each other." Rosa looked at the paper. Written in English on one side and Spanish on the other were simple words. "Hello, goodbye, please, thank you, yes, no." "You teach me Spanish," Tom said, pointing to himself and then to the Spanish words. "I teach you English." He pointed to Rosa and then to the English words. Rosa felt a spark of excitement. She had been so hungry for real conversation, and this felt like a door opening. "Yes," she said, smiling for the first time in months. "Good idea." They started that very morning. Tom would point to objects around the kitchen and say the English word. Then Rosa would tell him the Spanish word: stove, estufa, refrigerator, refrigerador, coffee, CFE acute. Tom repeated each Spanish word carefully, and Rosa could see him concentrating hard to get the pronunciation right. His accent was terrible, but he was trying, and that meant everything to Rosa. When it was Rosa's turn to learn English words, Tom was patient with her struggles. He would repeat words as many times as she needed, and when she couldn't quite get the pronunciation right, he would smile encouragingly and say, "Close enough." During lunch, they practiced simple sentences. "The food is good. La comida está buena. The weather is hot. El clima está caluroso." Rosa discovered that Tom was much more talkative when he was trying to communicate in Spanish. He made mistakes constantly, mixing up words and getting the grammar completely wrong, but he kept trying. And every time he managed to say something that Rosa understood, his whole face would light up with pride. "Rosa," he said one afternoon, carefully pronouncing each word in Spanish. "Cómo estás?" "Estoy bien," Rosa replied, then added in English, "I am good." Tom grinned. "We are good students." As the weeks passed, their daily lessons became the highlight of Rosa's day. They would practice while she cooked, while they ate, while they sat in the living room in the evenings. Tom brought home English books from town, and Rosa shared stories from her childhood, translating them into simple English as best she could. Rosa learned that Tom had grown up on this very ranch. His father had built the house when Tom was a boy, and Tom had taken over the ranch when his parents retired to Florida. She learned that he had met his wife, Linda, at a dance in town, and that they had been married for 3 years before the accident. "She was teacher," Tom said one evening, struggling with the Spanish words. "Ella era diestra." She helped children learn English. Rosa felt a pang of sadness for the woman she had never met, but also a strange sense of connection. "She sounds wonderful," Rosa said. "Ella era maravillosa," Tom agreed, then looked surprised at himself for saying it in Spanish. Rosa began to tell Tom about her own life. She told him about her parents, who had worked hard to send her to school even though they were poor. She told him about her dreams of becoming a teacher herself before she got married. She told him about her grandmother, who had taught her to cook and sew and take care of a house. "Why you no have children?" Tom asked one day, then immediately looked embarrassed. "Sorry, no my business." Rosa had been dreading this question, but now that it came, she found she could answer it without the usual shame. "Doctor say maybe stress," she said in English. "Maybe poor food. Maybe just God make me." Tom nodded thoughtfully. "Linda?" "She worry about this too. Doctor say she healthy, I healthy, but he shrugged. Sometimes things just happen." It was a relief to talk to someone who understood that not being able to have children didn't make her less of a woman. Diego and his mother had made her feel broken, defective. But Tom spoke about it like it was just something that happened sometimes. Not a moral failing. One afternoon, while they were practicing English in the kitchen, Tom asked Rosa to help him with something. One of his cattle had gotten tangled in a fence and had a cut on its leg. "You know about healing?" he asked. "Medicine?" Rosa nodded. Her grandmother had taught her about herbal remedies and basic first aid. In her village, she had often helped neighbors with cuts, burns, and minor illnesses. They walked out to the pasture together, where a young cow was standing quietly while blood dripped from a gash on her front leg. Rosa examined the wound carefully. "Not too deep," she said in English. "Need clean, need medicine." Back at the house, Rosa mixed up a poultice using ingredients she found in Tom's medicine cabinet and some herbs she had noticed growing wild near the house. Tom watched her work with fascination. "Where you learn this?" he asked. "My grandmother," Rosa said. "She teach me many things about healing." They returned to the cow, and Rosa gently cleaned the wound and applied her mixture. The cow stood still, as if she understood that Rosa was trying to help. "She will be okay," Rosa said confidently. Tom looked at Rosa with new respect. "You know much more than cooking and cleaning." Over the next few days, they checked on the cow. Together, the wound healed quickly and cleanly, with no sign of infection. Tom was impressed, and Rosa felt proud to have been useful in a way that had nothing to do with keeping house. "Maybe you teach me about healing too," Tom said. "Could be useful on ranch." Rosa agreed eagerly. She began showing Tom which plants around the ranch could be used for medicine, how to clean and bandage wounds, how to recognize signs of infection or illness. Tom was a quick learner, and Rosa discovered that she loved teaching. "You should have been teacher," Tom told her one evening after she had successfully explained how to make a tea that would help with stomach problems. "Maybe still can be," Rosa sighed, surprising herself with the thought. As spring turned to summer, Rosa and Tom's friendship deepened. They could now have real conversations, mixing English and Spanish freely when one language didn't have the right word. Rosa learned about Tom's hopes and fears, his memories of his parents and his wife, his plans for improving the ranch. Tom learned about Rosa's dreams beyond marriage and motherhood, her love of learning, her skill with healing that went far beyond what she had ever been allowed to practice in her village. One evening, as they sat on the front porch watching the sunset, Tom said something that took Rosa completely by surprise. "Rosa," he said in careful Spanish, "I'm sorry for how you come. Here. Diego, he was wrong to sell you. You are nothing to be bought." Rosa felt tears start in her eyes. No one had ever apologized to her for what Diego had done. Everyone in her village had acted like it was natural, even necessary. "Thank you," she said. "But maybe it was meant to happen. Maybe God have different plan." Tom looked at her thoughtfully. "You think God planned for us to help each other?" Rosa considered this. 6 months ago, she had been miserable, unwanted, treated like a burden by her own husband. Now she was learning new things every day, using skills she had forgotten. She had having conversations that made her feel intelligent and valued. "Yes," she said finally. "I think maybe God planned for us to help each other." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared behind the hills. For the first time in her adult life, Rosa felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to. Vida tomorrow would bring new words to learn, new skills to share, new conversations to explore. The silence that had once felt like a prison now felt like a peaceful space, where two lonely people could slowly become whole again. Rosa touched the wildflowers Tom had left on her windowsill that morning and smiled. Sometimes the most beautiful things grew in the most unexpected places. The morning after Tom told Rosa about his wife, everything felt different. Rosa woke up to find not just flowers on her windowsill, but a small notebook and a pen beside them. When she went to the kitchen for coffee, Tom was there waiting with a piece of paper in his hand. "I think," he said slowly, "maybe we help each other." Rosa looked at the paper. Written in English on one side and Spanish on the other were simple words. "Hello, goodbye, please, thank you, yes, no." "You teach me Spanish," Tom said, pointing to himself and then to the Spanish words. "I teach you English." He pointed to Rosa and then to the English words. Rosa felt a spark of excitement. She had been so hungry for real conversation, and this felt like a door opening. "Yes," she said, smiling for the first time in months. "Good idea." They started that very morning. Tom would point to objects around the kitchen and say the English word, then Rosa would tell him the Spanish word: stove, estufa, refrigerator, refrigerador, coffee, CFE acute da. Tom repeated each Spanish word carefully, and Rosa could see him concentrating hard to get the pronunciation right. His accent was terrible, but he was trying, and that meant everything to Rosa. When it was Rosa's turn to learn English words, Tom was patient with her struggles. He would repeat words as many times as she needed, and when she couldn't quite get the pronunciation right, he would smile encouragingly and say, "Close enough." During lunch, they practiced simple sentences. "The food is good. La comida está buena. The weather is hot. El clima está caluroso." Rosa discovered that Tom was much more talkative when he was trying to communicate in Spanish. He made mistakes constantly, mixing up words and getting the grammar completely wrong, but he kept trying. And every time he managed to say something that Rosa understood, his whole face would light up with pride. "Rosa," he said one afternoon, carefully pronouncing each word in Spanish, "Como?" "Como estas?" "Estoy bien," Rosa replied, then added in English, "I am good." Tom grinned. "We are good students." As the weeks passed, their daily lessons became the highlight of Rosa's day. They would practice while she cooked, while they ate, while they sat in the living room in the evenings. Tom brought home English books from town, and Rosa shared stories from her childhood, translating them into simple English as best she could. Rosa learned that Tom had grown up on this very ranch. His father had built the house when Tom was a boy, and Tom had taken over the ranch when his parents retired to Florida. She learned that he had met his wife, Linda, at a dance in town, and that they had been married for 3 years before the accident. "She was teacher," Tom said one evening, struggling with the Spanish words. "Ella era diestra." She helped children learn English. Rosa felt a pang of sadness for the woman she had never met, but also a strange sense of connection. "She sounds wonderful," Rosa said. Ella era maravillosa, Tom agreed, then looked surprised at himself for saying it in Spanish. Rosa began to tell Tom about her own life. She told him about her parents, who had worked hard to send her to school even though they were poor. She told him about her dreams of becoming a teacher herself before she got married. She told him about her grandmother, who had taught her to cook and sew and take care of a house. Why you no have children? Tom asked one day, then immediately looked embarrassed. Sorry, no my business. Rosa had been dreading this question, but now that it came, she found she could answer it without the usual shame. Doctor say maybe stress, she said in English. Maybe poor food. Maybe just ... how God make me, Tom nodded thoughtfully. Linda? She worry about this too. Doctor say she healthy, I healthy, but ... he shrugged. Sometimes things just happen. It was a relief to talk to someone who understood that not being able to have children didn't make her less of a woman. Diego and his mother had made her feel broken, defective. But Tom spoke about it like it was just something that happened sometimes, not a moral failing. One afternoon, while they were practicing English in the kitchen, Tom asked Rosa to help him with something. One of his cattle had gotten tangled in a fence and had a cut on its leg. You know about healing? He asked. Medicine? Rosa nodded. Her grandmother had taught her about herbal remedies and basic first aid. In her village, she had often helped neighbors with cuts, burns, and minor illnesses. They walked out to the pasture together, where a young cow was standing quietly while blood dripped from a gash on her front leg. Rosa examined the wound carefully. Not too deep, she said in English. Need clean, need medicine. Back at the house, Rosa mixed up a poultice using ingredients she found in Tom's medicine cabinet and some herbs she had noticed growing wild near the house. Tom watched her work with fascination. Where you learn this? He asked. My grandmother, Rosa said. She teach me many things about healing. They returned to the cow, and Rosa gently cleaned the wound and applied her mixture. The cow stood still, as if she understood that Rosa was trying to help. She will be okay, Rosa said confidently. Tom looked at Rosa with new respect. You know, much more than cooking and cleaning. Over the next few days they checked on the cow. Together the wound healed quickly and cleanly, with no sign of infection. Tom was impressed, and Rosa felt proud to have been useful in a way that had nothing to do with keeping house. Maybe you teach me about healing too, Tom said. Could be useful on ranch. Rosa agreed eagerly. She began showing Tom which plants around the ranch could be used for medicine, how to clean and bandage wounds, how to recognize signs of infection or illness. Tom was a quick learner, and Rosa discovered that she loved teaching. You should have been teacher, Tom told her one evening after she had successfully explained how to make a tea that would help with stomach problems. Maybe still can be, Rosa sighed, surprising herself with the thought. As spring turned to summer, Rosa and Tom's friendship deepened. They could now have real conversations, mixing English and Spanish freely when one language didn't have the right word. Rosa learned about Tom's hopes and fears, his memories of his parents and his wife, his plans for improving the ranch. Tom learned about Rosa's dreams beyond marriage and motherhood, her love of learning, her skill with healing that went far beyond what she had ever been allowed to practice in her village. One evening, as they sat on the front porch watching the sunset, Tom said something that took Rosa completely by surprise. Rosa, he said in careful Spanish, I'm sorry for how you come. Here. Diego, he was wrong to sell you. You are not thing to be bought. Rosa felt tears start in her eyes. No one had ever apologized to her for what Diego had done. Everyone in her village had acted like it was natural, even necessary. Thank you, she said. But maybe it was meant to happen. Maybe God have different plan. Tom looked at her thoughtfully. You think God planned for us to help each other? Rosa considered this. 6 months ago, she had been miserable, unwanted, treated like a burden by her own husband. Now she was learning new things every day, using skills she had forgotten. Having conversations that made her feel intelligent and valued. Yes, she said finally. I think maybe God planned for us to help each other. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared behind the hills. For the first time in her adult life, Rosa felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to. Tomorrow would bring new words to learn, new skills to share, new conversations to explore. The silence that had once felt like a prison now felt like a peaceful space, where two lonely people could slowly become whole again. Rosa touched the wildflowers Tom had left on her windowsill that morning and smiled. Sometimes the most beautiful things grew in the most unexpected places. 2 years after Rosa arrived at the ranch, her life had settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Her English was now fluent enough for complex conversations. Her immigration case was progressing steadily, and her reputation as a healer had spread throughout the county. She worked part-time with Dr. Martinez, the local veterinarian, and had started teaching basic first aid classes at the community center. More importantly, her relationship with Tom had deepened into something neither of them had expected. They weren't just friends anymore, or even just companions. They had become partners in every sense of the word, sharing not just a house but a life. It had happened so gradually that Rosa couldn't pinpoint exactly when friendship had turned into love. Maybe it was the night Tom held her while she cried about a letter from her village telling her that her childhood friend had died in childbirth. Maybe it was the morning Rosa found Tom collapsed in the barn with exhaustion and fever, and she had nursed him back to health over 3 days. Or maybe it was simply the accumulation of 1,000 small moments of kindness and understanding. They had been married for 6 months now. In a small ceremony at the church with Pastor Williams officiating, Mrs. Chun had assured them that the marriage would help Rosa's immigration case, but that wasn't why either of them had wanted it. They had wanted it because somewhere along the way, they had stopped being two lonely people sharing a house and had become a family. The wedding had been simple but perfect. Rosa wore a cream-colored dress from the department store in town, and Tom wore his father's wedding ring alongside the one he had worn for Linda. Rosa understood that she wasn't replacing Linda in Tom's heart. She was creating her own space there, and that felt right to both of them. On this particular morning in late spring, Rosa woke up feeling strange. Not sick exactly, but different. She had been tired lately, more tired than usual, and certain smells in the kitchen had been bothering her. She had attributed it to stress from her upcoming final immigration interview, but as she lay in bed listening to Tom getting ready for work, a different possibility occurred to her. Rosa sat up quickly, her hand going automatically to her stomach. She counted days in her head, then counted again. Her monthly cycle, which had been irregular for years, was now 3 weeks late. No, she whispered to herself, it's not possible. But even as she said it, Rosa felt a flutter of hope so strong it made her dizzy. She had given up on the dream of children years ago, had accepted that it simply wasn't part of God's plan for her life. Diego had made her feel like her inability to conceive was a moral failing, a sign that she was incomplete as a woman. But what if it hadn't been her fault at all? What if the stress of her unhappy marriage, the poor nutrition during the drought, years, and the constant anxiety about her worth as a wife had been the real problem? Rosa got dressed quickly and drove to town, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. She parked outside the pharmacy and sat in the truck for 10 minutes, trying to work up the courage to go inside. When she finally bought the pregnancy test, the pharmacist smiled at her kindly. "Good luck, dear," the older woman said, and Rosa realized her nervousness must be obvious. Back at the ranch, Rosa sat in her bathroom staring at the test kit, afraid to open it. If it was negative, she would have to accept once and for all that children weren't meant to be part of her story. If it was positive, she didn't dare think about what that might mean. The test was positive. Rosa stared at the 2 pink lines for a long time, not quite believing what she was seeing. She took the second test from the box and then the third. All positive. She was pregnant. Rosa sank to the bathroom floor and cried. Not from sadness this time, but from joy so overwhelming she didn't know how to contain it. After years of feeling broken, of being told she was worthless because she couldn't give her husband children, she was finally going to be a mother. But the joy was quickly followed by fear. Rosa was 32 years old, older than most first-time mothers in her village. She had no idea how to take care of herself during pregnancy, having never gotten this far before. And what if something went wrong? What if she lost the baby? What if Tom didn't want children after all? That evening, Rosa waited until after dinner to tell Tom. They were sitting on the front porch, watching the sunset as they did every night, when Rosa finally worked up the courage to speak. "Tom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I have something to tell you." Tom looked at her with concern. "What's wrong? You've been quiet all day." Rosa reached into her pocket and pulled out one of the pregnancy tests. She handed it to Tom without saying anything, watching his face as he realized what he was looking at. Tom stared at the test for a long moment, then looked at Rosa, then back at the test. "This is your—" "I'm pregnant," Rosa said the words. Feeling strange and wonderful in her mouth, Tom's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, disbelief, and then pure joy. He pulled Rosa into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I can't believe it," he whispered against her hair. "After everything, after all these years. Rosa, this is a miracle." Rosa started crying again, and Tom cried with her. They held each other on the porch as the stars came out, overwhelmed by the unexpected gift they had been given. The pregnancy wasn't easy. Rosa experienced severe morning sickness for the first 4 months, and the doctor warned her that her age and stress history put her at higher risk for complications. But Tom was with her every step of the way, driving her to appointments, holding her hair while she was sick, and reading pregnancy books with the same dedication he had once applied to learning Spanish. The people in their community rallied around them as well. Mrs. Patterson organized a baby shower. Dr. Martinez made sure Rosa got the best prenatal care available, and even the women who had once gossiped about Rosa living in sin with Tom now congratulated her warmly at church. As Rosa's belly grew, she watched Tom transform. The man who had been so quiet and withdrawn when she first arrived was now constantly talking to her stomach, telling their unborn child about the ranch, about the cattle, about all the things they would do together. "You think it's a boy or girl?" Tom asked one evening, his hand resting on Rosa's belly. "Doesn't matter," Rosa said, covering his hand with hers. "Healthy is all I want." But privately, Rosa hoped for a girl. She wanted to raise a daughter who would never doubt her worth, who would never feel like she had to earn her place in the world by having children or pleasing a husband. She wanted to raise a little girl who would know from birth that she was valuable exactly as she was. When Rosa went into labor on a hot July morning, Tom drove her to the hospital faster than he had ever driven anywhere. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 18 hours. There were moments when the doctors looked worried, when they spoke in hushed tones about emergency procedures and risks to both mother and baby. Tom never left Rosa's side, holding her hand through every contraction and whispering encouragement in both English and Spanish. When Rosa felt like she couldn't go on, Tom reminded her of how strong she was, how far she had come, how much this baby was already loved. Finally, after what felt like forever, their daughter was born. She came into the world screaming, healthy, and perfect, with Tom's blue eyes and Rosa's dark hair. "She's beautiful," Tom whispered, tears streaming down his face as the nurse placed their daughter in Rosa's arms. Rosa looked down at her baby and felt her heart expand in a way she hadn't known was possible. This tiny person was half her and half Tom, but completely her own. After years of being told she was incomplete, Rosa felt whole for the first time in her life. "What should we name her?" Tom asked. Rosa thought for a moment. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope," Tom smiled through his tears. "Hope Wade," he said, testing the name. "It's perfect." As Rosa held her daughter and watched Tom gently stroke the baby's tiny hand, she thought about the long journey that had brought them all to this moment. From being sold like property to becoming a mother, from being called barren to holding her own child, from despair to hope. God's plan had been so different from anything she could have imagined. But looking at her daughter's perfect face, Rosa couldn't imagine it any other way. Hope was living proof that sometimes the most beautiful flowers bloom in the most unexpected soil, and that love can grow even in the darkest circumstances. Rosa had finally found her miracle, and it was more wonderful than anything she had ever dared to dream. 5 years had passed since Hope was born, and the little girl had grown into a bright, curious child who spoke perfect English and Spanish and could charm everyone she met. She had her father's calm nature and her mother's determination, and she loved nothing more than helping Rosa in the garden where they grew medicinal herbs for Dr. Martinez's practice. Rosa's life had transformed completely. She was now a licensed nurse practitioner, having completed her education through night classes and online courses while raising Hope. She ran a small clinic in town 3 days a week, specializing in natural healing methods that combined traditional medicine with modern techniques. Her immigration status had been resolved years ago, and she was now a proud American citizen, but most importantly, Rosa had found her purpose. She used her experience and her skills to help other women who found themselves in desperate situations. She volunteered at the women's shelter, spoke at high schools about domestic violence, and had even testified before the state legislature about human trafficking. On this particular morning, Rosa was in her clinic when her assistant knocked on her office door. "Rosa, there's someone here to see you," Maria said, looking concerned. "He says he's your former husband." Rosa felt the blood drain from her face. She had hoped never to see Diego again, but she had always known this day might come. Word of her success had spread far beyond their small Texas town, and stories about the woman who had been sold for corn and built a new life in America had even reached back to Mexico. "Send him in," Rosa said, straightening her shoulders. Diego walked into her office looking older and thinner than she remembered. His clothes were clean but worn, and his eyes held a mixture of shame and desperation that Rosa recognized immediately. "Rosa," he said quietly, removing his hat. You look very well. What do you want, Diego?" Rosa asked directly. She had no interest in small talk with the man who had sold her like livestock. Diego shifted uncomfortably. "I heard about your daughter, about your marriage. I heard you have papers now, legal papers to live here." Rosa said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "The thing is," Diego went on, "Carmen is dead, died 2 years ago. And I've been thinking, that little girl, she's my blood too. I was married to you when she was made, so legally." Rosa stood up abruptly, understanding immediately where this was going. "Hope is not your daughter," she said firmly. "You have no claim to her." "But I do," Diego insisted, his voice becoming more confident. "In Mexico, a man has rights to children born to his wife, even if they're separated. And I never agreed to a divorce, so technically ... Technically," Rosa interrupted, "you sold me to another man for a sack of corn. That tends to void any husbands." "Rights you might have had?" Diego's face reddened. "I was desperate. The drought, the hunger. I did what I had to do to survive. But now things are different. I have a new wife, a young wife, but she can't have children. We need ... You need a child," Rosa finished. "So you thought you'd come here and take mine." "She's my property too," Diego said, his old arrogance returning, "half mine anyway. And I could give her a good life in Mexico, with her real culture, her real heritage." Rosa felt anger surge through her, but she kept her voice calm. "Diego, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Hope is an American citizen, born in America to married American parents. Tom adopted her legally when we married. You have no rights to her whatsoever. We'll see about that," Diego said. "I've talked to a lawyer. There are ways to challenge these things." After Diego left, Rosa called Tom immediately. Within an hour, he was at the clinic with Mrs. Chun, who was now a family friend as well as their lawyer. "He can't just take Hope," Tom said, his usually calm demeanor cracking with worry. "Can he?" Mrs. Chun shook her head. "Not legally, no. Hope was born here. Tom's name is on her birth certificate as her father, and Rosa's first marriage was effectively dissolved when Diego sold her to Tom. But that doesn't mean he can't cause trouble. And trouble was exactly what Diego caused. Over the next several weeks, he filed papers in both American and Mexican courts. Claiming paternal rights to Hope, he hired a lawyer who specialized in international custody cases. and he began telling anyone who would listen that his daughter had been stolen from him by an illegal immigrant and her accomplice. The case attracted media attention, which Rosa had desperately wanted to avoid. Reporters started showing up at the clinic and at Hope's school asking invasive questions about Rosa's past and her daughter's parentage. "Mama," Hope asked one evening after a particularly difficult day, "why is that man saying he's my daddy? Tom is my daddy." Rosa knelt down to Hope's level, looking into the blue eyes that were so much like Tom's. "Sometimes, sweetheart, confused. People say things that aren't true. But you know who your real family is, right?" Hope nodded solemnly. "You and Daddy Tom and me, we're a family. That's right, baby. And no one can change that." But privately, Rosa was terrified. She had seen too many cases where bureaucracy and legal technicalities had separated children from loving families. What if some judge decided that Diego's biological claim was more important than the family Hope had always known? The case went to trial on a cold February morning. The courthouse was packed with supporters from Rosa's community, but also with reporters and curiosity seekers drawn by the unusual nature of the case. Diego's lawyer argued that Rosa had been kidnapped, that her marriage to Tom was therefore invalid, and that Diego's parental rights had never been properly terminated. He painted Diego as a grieving father who had been searching for his missing wife and child. For years, Mrs. Chun systematically destroyed these arguments. She presented evidence of the original transaction between Diego and Tom, witness testimony from people in Rosa's village who remembered the sale and documentation of Rosa's legal immigration process. She showed that Rosa had not been kidnapped but rescued, that her marriage to Tom was completely legal, and that Diego had willingly given up any rights to Rosa when he sold her. But the most powerful moment came when Rosa herself took the stand. "Mr. Hernandez," Diego's lawyer said, "isn't it true that you never wanted to leave Mexico? That you were forced to come to America against your will?" Rosa looked directly at Diego as she answered, "I was forced to leave my home, yes. But not by Tom. I was forced by a husband who valued a sack of corn more than his wife's life and dignity." "But surely you missed your homeland, your culture?" "I missed my village," Rosa said. "But Mexico is a big country, and there was nothing left for me in the part where I lived. Diego made sure of that when he sold me." "Don't you think your daughter deserves to know her Mexican heritage?" Rosa smiled. "My daughter speaks perfect Spanish. She knows about her grandmother's recipes and her great-grandmother's remedies. She celebrates Dia de los Muertos and Christmas in the Mexican tradition. But she also knows about her American heritage from her father Tom. She's not missing anything. She's gaining everything." The judge took 2 days to reach his decision. When court reconvened, Rosa sat between Tom and Mrs. Chun, holding both their hands while they waited. "This case," the judge began, "involves some of the most disturbing circumstances I've encountered in my 20 years on the bench. The evidence clearly shows that the plaintiff, Diego Hernandez, sold his wife to another man in exchange for food. This action was morally reprehensible and legally equivalent to abandonment." Rosa felt Tom squeeze her hand. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "the child in question was conceived and born years after this abandonment to a woman who was legally married to another man at the time. Mr. Hernandez has no biological, legal, or moral claim to this child." Diego's face darkened with anger. "However," the judge said, "this case highlights a larger issue that affects many families. The plaintiff's actions were the result of desperate circumstances, grinding poverty, and cultural attitudes that treat women as property. While I cannot excuse his behavior, I can acknowledge the systemic problems that led to it." The judge then ruled completely in Rosa's favor. Hope would remain with Rosa and Tom. Diego's parental rights were permanently terminated, and he was ordered to pay court costs for bringing a frivolous lawsuit. As they left the courthouse, Rosa felt lighter than she had in months. Hope skipped between her and Tom, chattering about wanting ice cream to celebrate. "It's over," Tom said, putting his arm around Rosa's shoulders. "Yes," Rosa agreed. "It's finally over." That evening, as they sat on their front porch watching Hope play with her dog in the yard, Rosa reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. She had been sold as a barren woman with no value, and now she was a respected healer, a loving mother, and an advocate for other women in crisis. "Tom," she said, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if Diego hadn't sold me? If I had stayed in the village?" Tom thought for a moment. "I think you would have found a way to survive," he said. "You're the strongest person I know, but I'm grateful every day that your path led here, to us." Rosa looked at Hope, who was now showing her dog how to sit and stay in both English and Spanish commands. "Me too," she said. As the sun set over the ranch, Rosa felt a deep sense of completion. She had come full circle from despair to hope, from being unwanted to being cherished, from feeling worthless to knowing her true value, asterisk.